Hi, everyone. It's Rob, and thanks for listening in today. I greatly appreciate your time. Today, I chat with Anne Wicks about education reform. Anne is the Anne Kimball Johnson Director of Education Reform at the Bush Institute, where she develops and oversees the policy, research, and engagement work of the education reform team. During our discussion, we speak about a host of topics from the obvious educational challenges during this pandemic and why libraries are still very relevant. We also discuss the Institute's School Leadership Initiative, a program that is about equipping school districts to find, support, and retain highly effective principals. So please enjoy this educational chat with Anne. Hi, Anne. It's so good to see you today.
Hi, Rob. Good to see you as well.
You are coming to us live from the Presidential Library, the George Bush Presidential Library. And I see these wonderful pictures behind you. One that caught my eye before we started chatting, or before we started recording, was the picture of President Clinton and President Bush. And it's so nice to see, especially during this such a unique time in our lives, two people with differing opinions on things having a good relationship. And can you talk a little bit about their relationship? You shared a little before we started recording.
Sure. Well, the picture that you're talking about, there, President Bush and President Clinton are on a stage together and they're laughing. They're looking at each other and they're laughing about something. They've said it's a small club for former presidents, right? I think they've had this singular experience. And President Bush and President Clinton in post-presidential life have become close. I think what you saw in President Bush 41, who modeled this sort of collaboration famously in the letter that he gave to President Clinton when President Clinton won and President Bush 41 was leaving after one term in office. And this is a while back, so your younger listeners may not know this, but it was a contentious campaign, and President Bush 41 wrote a very gracious letter welcoming Bill Clinton into the Oval Office and telling he would be praying for him and that his success was our success, right, as a country. Just like a wonderful example of humility and leadership and an eye on a bigger prize. So I think that has set the tone for the relationship that you'd see with President Bush and President Clinton, who now that friendship has turned into this remarkable leadership program here at the Bush Center that we work in partnership with 4 presidential libraries, including the Clinton Center, Bush 41, and the LBJ Center in Austin. And it's a leadership program for really high flyers, mid-career leaders who have tons of potential, have done incredible things to date, and we know have the capacity to do more in their futures, who get to spend about 6 months or so, I think it is, together, visiting the different centers and working through a really unique leadership program that includes case studies from these administrations. They get to hear a lot of times from members of those administrations who talk about the challenges and opportunities that they saw, talking a lot about the good leadership starts with understanding yourself and understanding what you stand for, how to communicate that effectively, how to collaborate across an aisle when there may only be a little bit you agree on, but in a lot that you don't, Mm-hmm. So I think what you're seeing there is President Clinton and President Bush sort of modeling that ethos in that picture where they're enjoying each other's company and laughing, when of course there's things they do agree on and things that they don't agree on in terms of policy, but certainly have a deep respect for each other.
Yeah, so great to see that. And you talk about this program where you bring in high flyers. I guess these are high performing people or emerging leaders of that type. Now, I want to talk to you about high flying in that you attended Stanford University. And while there, you won 2 national championships as a player on the volleyball team and also as a coach. So 3 in total. And whenever I speak with somebody who's had that level of success, I'm fascinated by it. And so the first thing I thought about was, what's it like and what's the difference when you win as a player versus as a coach?
No one has asked me that before, Rob. So, I mean, it was when I was a player, it was such a culmination of like the dream I'd had on the bulletin board, sort of the proverbial bulletin board for a really long time. And it was such a my senior year when we won, I was so lucky. I got to win my senior year. The last match I played in college was the national championship that we won. It's just, you're extraordinarily lucky if you're in that spot. And we had this incredible team. It's just like everything came together at the right moment, which I think you'll hear people say a lot of times about successful teams. There's something going on, a little magic, a little alchemy in the air that sort of creates that. So I think I was so focused, on achieving this dream with I had really good friends to this day, really good friends on that team, that we were able to do this together. I think when I was coaching, it was different because I had to like retrain my brain. I wanted to get in the match, right? I wanted to put myself in, which you can't do, obviously, especially if you're like the lowly assistant, way down the bench. But I was really, it was sort of transformed into, this is what happens if you can coach and develop people, get them to believe in themselves. It wasn't me alone, but just sort of that experience of, I thought, what did I need when I was playing that would have helped me understand my confidence and strategy and what I was capable of. The young women on the Stanford volleyball teams are incredible athletes and great players. And how do you make sure they're confident in themselves and each other to sort of stick in it when it's really hard, right? Like there's always moments where it's just going to be really hard. Everything's on the line. You're either going to do it or you're not. And it's going to be very clear. Mm-hmm. And sort of building that muscle of getting comfortable performing clearly and having it, win or a loss come out of it, and confidence in their ability to navigate, and confidence that if you lose, you can bounce back and keep at it. And I think it was so fulfilling for me as a coach to sort of watch this team really transform over a season and win. So it was a different way of looking at it.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. And what lessons do you feel like you took away now, once you got into your career, that helped you become a stronger leader?
I've thought about this because I've seen some statistic. I think that like there's a lot of women in the C-suite, an extraordinary number played sports. That if you look across industry, there's a study, a McKinsey study or something like that I saw a few years ago. But I think it was more the idea, like, how do you collaborate with people, right? Like, no one is an island. You have to collaborate and you need a lot of people to get anything done. And the idea of setting goals and sort of being accountable, right? Being accountable for that. And the work you have to do on your own. Right. There's sometimes that people who I think are more, there's a lot of work you have to do when you're just by yourself. Like you have to be getting smarter, more thoughtful on your own. And I think those are things that you really learn if you're at a high level competitive sports, that those are all elements that you sort of naturally transfer through your life. Sometimes you're better at those than others, but I think that was probably really helpful for me.
Yeah. Where do you keep the award they give you or whatever it is? Do you ever look at it?
Well, we get rings.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I don't wear. They're in my jewelry box on my dresser. My son likes to look at them. But I don't know, I think I've got photos, but I don't, I don't have it up on the wall.
You're not walking around my the house with the rings.
Yeah. Depends what I'm trying to accomplish, I guess.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So you are director of the Education Reform Initiative at the George W. Bush Institute. What are some of the key initiatives that you are focused on right now?
We work on 3 areas in the Education Reform Initiative, and we're lucky at the Bush Institute. There's a range of issues that my colleagues work on that are cross domestic issues into some global issues. So we're lucky we get to focus on the education piece. And we talk about school leadership, the role of school principals, and then what we can do to better recruit, support, and retain great principals in every school because they have such an impact on the success for kids. We work a lot on accountability, the idea of we set high expectations for what all kids can learn, and we use some high quality comparable assessments to measure where kids are learning, who's falling behind, what that looks like, and then use that information to design the right kind of interventions, the right kind of consequences. How do you think from a policy side then, how to better support the system so that all kids have opportunities to learn and succeed? And then the third element is the Laura Bush Foundation for America's Libraries. Mrs. Bush is a former teacher and librarian and has had a passionate love and advocacy for reading and helping kids develop a love for reading her entire career, including when she was First Lady of Texas and First Lady of the US. So the foundation exists to give small grants to schools that largely serve kids living in poverty. Those are often under-resourced schools that don't have huge library budgets. We're able to give small grants to help them update and expand their collections, which oftentimes haven't really been touched in years, so that kids have access to books that are relevant, that help them understand themselves and the world and develop a love of reading. And we'll be expanding some work around literacy and the importance of the science of reading and how we teach kids to read in the months and years to come as well.
Mm-hmm. And when we spoke prior to recording, you mentioned that there's some research going on in 4 districts in the U.S. Can you talk about some of the research you're doing in these 4 districts in the U.S. and what you're learning?
Yes, we've had the real privilege of working with 4 school districts who are helping us test what we call the Principal Talent Management Framework, which is more exciting than that description sounds. But for us, it's all the elements of what impacts a principal throughout their career. Everything from the preparation they get at the front end to how they're evaluated and compensated once they've been in the role. So things like recruitment's in there, selection, professional learning, their boss, how much autonomy they have to make decisions at the campus level. Some principals have a lot, some have very little, and that can change over a principal's career. And we wanted to understand what really helps districts develop and keep great principals. Teachers matter so much for kids, but they're followed as a close second by principals. And principals are like a great boss on a campus, right? Teachers love to work with a great boss. That principal helps develop a strong instructional culture, really engage the students and the families in ways that make them want to be at school, make them understand what's happening, and helps kids progress so they're ready for their next level. Well, it's important that we keep those principals, right? That's a big responsibility. And we're learning things like not only are the principals great bosses, but the principals themselves need a great boss. And so the role of the principal supervisor is becoming it's more clear to us how important that is and what that person can do to help principals support their teachers and their kids. Mm-hmm. And we're finding, like in many organizations, I don't think this is specific to districts, but it happens there, where the left hand doesn't speak to the right hand. And so many of these things cross silos, cross teams, but a lot of times policies or practices may be developed kind of on their own. And so we're helping districts understand, we should rethink this to better connect how we recruit and select into our evaluation system, for example, things like that create a more seamless experience for principals. So principals are one of the most important people you can have in a district. And we want to make sure districts have a clear strategy and some practices in place to make sure they're getting the best, they're developing them, and they're keeping them so that kids are really on track to learn and succeed. But it's a real privilege for us to learn and hear from principals. Sometimes when you're working in policy, you can be developing up here, you're thinking at the systems level, and it's a really important check to be hearing directly from, well, that's great, but here's what this looks like in my campus, or here's what this looks like in my district. And it helps make both of us better to work together.
Is the principal's boss, so to speak, the superintendent, or is that the typical role in a state?
It can be. It depends on the size of the district. So if it's a smaller district and there's only a handful of principals, the superintendent is likely the boss. In
Mhm.
larger districts where you might have 80 or 100 schools, something like that, then you'll have another layer down from the superintendent who manage principals. We think that everybody in a central office should really be oriented and pointed to, how am I supporting campuses? How am I supporting principals? They're not always organized that way, and so you'll hear
Right.
these divides between central office and campuses. And really strong districts have tend to reverse that, where people in the central office understand their role as they're driving towards campus support. What am I doing to support the work that's happening with principals and teachers? And how are we organizing everything from when we schedule meetings to how we deliver information? All that kind of stuff is organized around the districts.
It's an organization, and it's got the leadership at the top, so to speak, and the culture. They're building a culture, and I think about the different principals, and they're cascading the culture into their school.
Mhm.
Some better than others. What are the challenges to recruiting and retaining highly talented principals? Is it economics, or is it the pipeline? Just, is it strong for great principals these days, or as a career? Or
It is, it can really vary. There are some places that have a huge applicant pool whenever they're searching for principals, but they don't have folks who have the right kind of experience or skills or demeanor. Every district, states usually have a framework of what effective principals should these are the kinds of skills and traits that they have. Sometimes that's translated and sometimes that not. So this is one of the things when we're working with districts, when we talk about preparation, we're saying, who are you partnering with? Which higher ed program or other program are you using to help people get their administrative credential? Do they know what you're looking for? How do they, like, what sort of artifacts or information have you given them so that they're going to be developing people you want to hire? And then the other piece of that is, how do you think about how you're developing people internally? So how are you looking for teacher leaders who may move into a principal role? Or which of your APs do you think assistant principals should be moved into a principal role, or an instructional coach? There's lots of leadership roles that may exist on a campus where you could start to see, that's someone who we should get into the pool and encourage to get into the pool. And that's also a great way, if you're talking about diversifying principals, wanting to recruit principals of color, women, men, get principals that look like the students in their schools. You can be really intentional about seeking leadership on your campuses, in the teachers and the coaches and the assistant principals, so that your pool, you're starting to develop your own people, which is a great way to do it. If people understand, in this district, I have an opportunity to be developed for my leadership. If I want to be a principal,
Mhm.
there's going to be opportunities for me to get to develop, and I don't just have to go off to another program and try to get my credential and hope for the best that I'll get hired in my district. So strong districts do that kind of thing, which is not dissimilar from which companies that really want to develop their people in any sector would do
Right.
that.
Are economics a hindrance to this career track? I read, it was years ago, in New York, I think it was, one of the school districts was testing out bringing in leadership and teachers and paying them a higher wage than normal, but having a strong level of accountability around their performance. Is that broken, or is that a hindrance? As I started with the question.
Yeah, I think that's a big discussion, and people have lots of opinions about that. I'll say that. I think that if you're a district leader and you want to be strategic about keeping your best folks, you got to make sure you know what your surrounding districts are paying, so that you're competitive, if not better. If you're able to do that, we think
Yeah.
that's really important. And so it's not normal necessarily to be doing a salary study, where your HR team would be checking that out. We think that's strong districts do that kind of thing because you want to be competitive.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think there is a real shift that we can make in the system from increasing your pay based solely on tenure, or checking off like, oh, and now I have a master's degree and I'll get paid more, when you might have gotten a degree from a terrible program. Everybody knows it didn't really improve your practice, but you checked a box on a list
Mhm.
and now you're going to get a bump on the salary schedule. That doesn't really incent leadership and innovation in the ways that what you were describing. You might see if you're going to get paid more, but you're going to have a higher level of accountability. I think that's really interesting. There's some charter schools or private schools who use that model, some quite successfully. And I think the challenge would be, how do you adapt that to a massive system like public education is in the US? Because the system is so big, it's hard to push it, right? To do some things, but it's easier to pull through exemplars. So I think it's really interesting when districts try things like that,
Mhm.
or charters try things like that, because then all of us can learn and say, oh, that was successful there, and this is what they did and they learned.
Mhm.
So I think it's interesting. Most people who get into education they're not doing it because they think they're going to be a billionaire. They do it
Right.
because they really love the practice and the craft of education, and that's what they want to do and they love doing. At the same time, we shouldn't, I don't think that takes away the idea that some people are really driven by this idea of, I can demonstrate leadership and performance and excellence, and I should be rewarded for that. I don't think those are mutually exclusive for everyone.
Mhm. Since you've been with the center, how have things changed in education? What have you seen that you feel really positive about, and what are you concerned about?
Mm. It's hard to ignore the COVID elephant in the room, in terms of what's changed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Wow.
it is, and this is mostly what makes me concerned. There's some hope in it, but I don't think we really have a handle on the massive disruption for so many kids around the country when schools were closed in the spring. And then what happened through the summer, and as schools have reopened in various forms, virtual, hybrid, in person, this school year. The learning early reports that we've seen from some districts, Dallas just released, sort of bravely, I think, released data that showed enormous learning loss, particularly for Black, Latinx students, English language learners, special ed. Really, some of our most vulnerable kids around the country have had massive loss, massive learning loss. They just have not engaged. They either don't have access to a device or reliable wireless if they're trying to learn from home. They don't have, their parents or caregivers are working, and so they can't sit with them to help them manage their virtual learning, which is really hard. Virtual instruction is really different, and most teachers have gotten little to no real professional development to, like, how do we adapt what you're doing? Many have figured it out kind of on the fly and are supporting each other, but I'm like, that doesn't seem like, it seems like we should have been able to do a better job as a system responding to that. So I'm really worried. Many leaders I know are really worried about these kids that we've lost, right? Like, that are falling farther behind. And then what do we need to do as a system to help them through and get beyond COVID? Because if kids are losing a year or more of school of learning, that's going to impact them the rest of their schooling careers. And we're going to have to catch kids up. We're going to have
Right.
to do it in a way that the kids are not feeling punished or singled out. This is not their fault. This is not the fault of the kids. So it's the responsibility of the adults to respond to what's happened, both the unintended consequences of the shutdowns and the switch to virtual, and understand the positives that have come, innovations that have come. So things like the small pods of learning that have been really successful. What have we learned about that? What should we adapt and do? For some kids, the move to virtual has been great. It's been really served them well. So how do we understand that and use that going forward? What kinds of hybrid or virtual learning were effective? And what should we do, particularly for the older grades, where kids are a little more independent and able to engage and manage themselves? So I think the transformation by way of disaster that is happening in the system
Mhm.
right now, and my hope is that the adults who are leading understand sort of our collective responsibility to sort of put our arms around all kids, and help them know we're going to move them up and through this so that they are they're still on track for opportunity that will come next as young adults in our country.
Just curious, is there anything around the educators and even the principals and the leadership at the districts, and maybe some of the pressures and anxieties and stresses that they're feeling, and how that might be impacting the education system?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. We've been interviewing a lot of principals right now, doing our we do data gathering in the fall normally. So we have been with our 4 districts and talking to them, and it's almost unbelievable to me, the pressure that's on principals right now. They're not getting the kind of clear guidance that they need from the district or state agencies or the federal Department of Education on, this is how you should reopen schools, this is how you should do it. So right now there's so much that is being handed off to the principals, like figure it out, sort of adapt this to your campus, do the contact tracing yourself on your campus, which is crazy to me. You know, how can a principal do contact tracing? Like no, you can't, they can't do that and lead instruction. So, and for the principals and teachers who are parents themselves and are trying to manage their own school age kids and support their kids while supporting many, many others who are trying to go through the same experience, or they don't have any subs right in their school. So they're having to get really creative. We were hearing one principal, her janitor was quarantined for COVID, but the janitor, of course, was a key part of the school health and safety in terms of how they coordinated cleaning surfaces in the cafeteria, for example. And the principal herself was having to do it, which clean, and of course she would do it because she's a servant leader and it had to be done, but she's not doing a lot of other things because she's having to clean the cafeteria in between kid shifts because her janitor is out and she has no backup capacity. So this loss of capacity, we would never, most organizations would never allow it. We'd be like, stop, no, we can't do this. We have to reorganize everything and dive in. And somehow we've all just sort of said, oh, the principals are going to kind of deal this and figure it out. And it's worrisome, to say the least, I think, on that piece.
Definitely. Pre-COVID, where did you notice things were on the right track?
Oh yeah, there's some great examples of states, I would say, who are making some commitments to kids. So one of my favorite examples, and we get to show them off in one of our research projects, is what's happened in Mississippi. Mississippi has been, I think, they would kind of a bottom dweller, always on the near the bottom of the list of every educational ranking list and student score list. And in about 7 years ago, they decided they were going to make significant improvements to literacy. They had to make sure that their youngest students were learning to read, were on track, were improving in reading and literacy and numeracy. And so they passed some policy, they put some resources behind it, they changed practices in the State Department of Education that were pushed out to the district, a really sustained commitment to improving instruction, improving curriculum with a real focus on reading, that it then expanded into math. And they have seen a steady increase and remarkable increase in the academic performance for kids, particularly Black students in the state, Latino students in the state, students of color who had significant lags against white students, and they're showing progress. And they just were doing the right thing over and over, very deliberately kept doing the right thing, and had sustained leadership and commitment, both in like political capital, policy, resourcing, time, all the things that it takes. And it's really remarkable. And now that means you've got thousands more kids who are on track for their next step, which means if that sustains, right, they're going to be able to graduate high school. They'll go on to get some higher ed, whether it's a certificate or a 2 or a 4-year degree, something that research shows gives more economic agency and opportunity. And then they go on to be young adults, right, who can support themselves, support a family, engage in the way that we hope for our own kids, for all kids, that they'll have that kind of opportunity. So those kinds of things are really exciting when you see just a commitment to do the right thing that's sustained by the adults in the system and the kids benefit.
Do you feel like when there's a great example like that, that there is enough collaboration around the country where this, like a Mississippi is doing something really remarkable, and other states sit up and take notice and say, can I come? Can I see what you're doing? Can I replicate that? Give me the playbook, or however you whatever the
Yeah.
terminology is in education.
Yes, I do think people are absolutely paying attention, which is great, because at the end of the day, I think people in education want kids to do well, right? They want kids to do well, right? It's rare to come across someone who has picked that as their career, who is anti-kid.
Mm-hmm.
They might get, tired of kids at some point, but they're
Have
not
their
anti-kid.
days.
Yeah, right. As do we all. But I
Right.
think what it always makes me think is a system, we just haven't done enough to build the capacity of the people who are trying to lead. This is really hard and very complex. What it isn't just follow these 10 steps on a checklist and it'll work, whether you're in Baltimore or Bakersfield or wherever, right? It's context matters. But I think the really developing the capacity and sharing things like this is what they did. And people are really interested in it because they want to be able to adopt the right things. Sometimes it takes some political capital and courage to stand up and say, we have to do this differently, and that may be more tenable in some places and times than others. But I think it encourages me that people remain curious and want to know more about success. I think that's a real plus for the system.
Something I wonder a lot about is the dollars that can go into a district, and what difference that really makes. So, if you have the good fortune to live in an excellent school district, that has good tax base, and you could do some unique things, or not worry so much about whether or not you have a choice to buy books or replace a heating unit.
Right.
So I'm from Detroit, and so in Detroit it's very challenging in the city, yet 20 minutes out into the suburbs, some of the best schools in the state, maybe even in the country, in Oakland County. I'm curious about how the dollars make a difference.
I think it undoubtedly does, right? The way our public district revenue system is set up based on property tax, it will, out of the gate, we're inherently inequitable and unequal in that way. Yeah. And I think there's people who have done a lot of work around the redlining of where mortgage districts were, and that this goes back decades, that got this started, right? That you could see where people of color were allowed to purchase homes or not, and the grades of property that were designated decades ago still show up in school district boundaries today, right? And where there's failing districts or struggling districts and high performing districts. It's a real challenge, and we've tried to come at it in a number of ways around how federal dollars are allocated to the poorest districts, or to support special ed or students with disabilities, to try to help balance some of that. But it is an imperfect science. My son is in public school in a great public school district with a strong tax base, and who also fundraises a lot of money from the parents to do the extras that make music class and Spanish class and the library beautiful and all those kinds of things. Many districts don't. If your parents can't fundraise significant dollars, you're not going to have those things. Those are really clear iniquities, I think, around the funding, that the basing it on property tax is just a real challenge to unwind. And I think it's something that not enough people really are knowledgeable about how that came to be, and then how do we try to rectify that. And I'm not sure I know a solution, but it's a significant issue for all of us to get smarter about.
Yeah. So obviously it's not as simple as diverting the property tax base dollars to, let's say, the state level, and then equitably transferring those dollars per kid in each district. It's not that simple.
They have tried to do, no, that sounds really simple, right? Doesn't that sound logical? They've tried to do something like that in Texas called Robin Hood, which is essentially, so our district, for example, pays a lot more a higher percentage into the state pot. Mm-hmm. And then refills it with fundraising. It's a very complicated code on how that works, and lots of politics involved.
Oh yeah.
So I think I know, I wish there was a simple, elegant solution to pull off, but I think it's a really important issue for us to talk about, to get at some of the changes that we all want to see.
I mean, it is. It's the foundation of our society, our youth, and how well they're educated. It's the next generation, the generation after that, and so important, the work that you are all doing now. Earlier, you talked about reading, and before that, you talked about the libraries. And I wondered, how are libraries relevant these days? What's going on with libraries?
My gosh, I'm a library person. I mean, it's so great when you walk in and there's always like a beautiful window and the books and, I think so for so many of our kids, particularly kids who don't go home to a bookshelf that's packed full of books that they have at home, school libraries are so critical because it's a place they can go to discover, take home a book, read it, be able to come back and, replenish their own supply. I think that's really important for kids to do it. We know for our young students, having an actual physical book, research tells us that's an important part of learning to read and building your skills. So while tablets are great at many things, it's still really important that kids have physical books, that is a really important part of learning to read. And it's great when they get to sit with an older sibling or a caregiver, or a parent or a grandparent, and practice reading together. That is a simple but highly effective tool. So we think as kids get older, you're seeing all sorts of interesting things happening around libraries when they become more resource for research or new ideas or makers labs, or, so much reference and research material is now online, which is great for kids to be able to access. They're not like trying to learn a microfiche machine, like from the olden times, or the card catalog. So I think libraries are really the center of schools when they're used effectively. There's a school here in Dallas where the librarian was actually certified as a math teacher and created a study hub within the school for a lot of kids could go and get extra study time. So they made it really like an academic center for kids in the library, which is a really important and great thing for people to have, to know this is what I do here. I can go learn and discover, whether you're in kindergarten or you're a junior in high school, or anywhere in between.
What I've seen is, just building off of what you said, it's like a hybrid. There's technology in the library now, much more so, but there's still the books. And isn't there such an energy when you walk in, like you were mentioning? Do you think it's just all that knowledge on all the shelves, from all the people that got that out of their minds and onto paper and onto these shelves, that just generates an energy where you want to browse and grab something and read it?
Yes, I think so. Maybe it's just us, but I love, I grew up, my mom is a huge reader. And so she'd always take us to the library, and that was like, okay, we get to pick out our like 10 books or whatever to come home. And I think there's just something about that you can have access to this, right? I sort of love that in America, we value that there's public libraries and school libraries everywhere, that these are, all you need is the library card and you check it out and you can have access to this knowledge. So, and I think that's so important for kids as they start to discover the world. They get to see what's beyond what they experience, right? Like sort of what is, if they're not, if they're not able to travel a lot, if they sort of know a smaller area, books give them agency, right, to the rest of the world and experience of others, and knowledge about things they could do, help them understand and see things that they can then be and understand and be curious about. And there's nothing quite like books to do that. Some of that you can get through movies or TV shows and all this kind of, but actually getting to read it and experience it, I think through books is really valuable for kids.
And you mentioned that there's some grants that you've given out or that you give out, but they're small, and even though they're small, they're extremely meaningful.
Yes, yes. I mean, the nice thing about there's that, if we give a $5,000 grant to an elementary school, they can purchase a pretty significant amount of books with that money and with that grant that go directly into their shelves. And that'll be meaningful if we even have a library that hasn't really had any significant updates to their collection in 10 or more years. Those books are going to be in a little bit of rough shape. They may need to diversify the collection so that they're not, that the children see children like themselves. In the books, they see their own experience reflected back to them. They see current topics. They, all sorts of things that you'd want kids to be able to access. And that's really important that schools can do that. And then it helps if you've got the librarian, whoever's in charge. Some schools have a librarian, some don't. But teachers can know, oh, we've got these new books that have come in. So if you're doing a unit on X, on space, we've got May Among the Stars, which is a delightful book that was on Mrs. Bush's reading list this summer. That was written by Rhoda Ahmed, who's a fascinating person in her own right, but about an African-American female astronaut here in the US, right? Like, it's a great children's book. You could have that in your collection, things like that, that can be part of a unit that a teacher is doing, or a teacher can say, oh, let me go to the library. I know you like space, check out this book, and you can see what it is. All those sorts of things that really deepen the experience for kids as they learn to read and experience the world.
Yeah. As a regular person, any of us, are there things that we can do in our day-to-day lives to ensure proper education for children, support the school districts? Or are there things outside of, just our tax base or whatever that we can do?
Yes, I have two answers for you. One is kind of wonky, but
those are the best.
Pay attention to school board elections.
Yeah.
School board election is democracy at your doorstep,
Yes.
right? And school boards make a lot of decisions, not only hiring a superintendent, but they can get involved in many decisions at the district level. Great ones have a clear vision of where they should intervene or they should not. The less functional ones get mucked up in all sorts of things. It's really important to pay attention to who's running for school board and what they think pay attention to what matters to them. And those tend to be lower turnout elections. And so and their influence is outsized relative to who elects them, put it that way. So pay attention to your school board election. And I would say the second thing, the best thing you can do is volunteer in a campus if you can. If you're a parent, try to do that. This year it's really different. I know in my son's school, the only thing we can do is like sort of head to toe PPE and volunteer in the lunchroom, which is a delightful experience. You should, if you have the opportunity to do something like that, as we move through and beyond COVID, I would say seek opportunities to do that, to be a reader, be a greeter, crossing guard, an aide in a classroom, volunteer, because I think there's nothing quite like seeing up close sort of what's happening for kids in the schools, and be part of the capacity if you can.
Yeah. Oh, that's great advice, both of those. Okay, as we wrap up here, I can't help but ask this for my own sake, and that is, what's it like interacting with former President George W. Bush and First Lady Laura Bush, and when you first got integrated there, what was it like when you met them?
Well, they're terrific people. They are terrific people. And so it's really an honor to be able to interact them and know them a little bit up close. I think the thing that is, they're both very funny people. And they're, and so it's a fun environment to be around. But one of the things that's great, and I especially appreciate this at this point in my career, is they're very clear about what they believe in. They are values led. And it's really a wonderful privilege to work for an organization that's values led in that way. And a real respect for human dignity and the viewpoints of all. We are clearly a right of center policy institute. we work with people across the spectrum because that is a closely held value of President and Mrs. Bush, that we care about ideas, the right idea, the ideas that have the ability to positively impact people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're about that idea, come on in. So I think it's a real privilege to be able to work for an organization that sort of reflects that kind of value, and President Mrs. Bush's, sort of long history of leadership as a governor in the White House,
Mm-hmm.
and the work that they both did on education and other issues, thinking about human dignity, it's really a privilege.
It is. Did you ever say to yourself, wow, that person used to be the president? Or did you call like a parent or something? It's like, I just was talking to the president.
Yeah, I mean, there's a level of, it's a little surreal, I think, in
surreal,
that way,
that's
but
good.
they are, I think they are not showboaty people. So they don't make you feel like you have to, sort of genuflect in any sort of weird ways. They are very genuine leaders, and they're very respectful of the work we do at the Institute. And we're also, I think we really feel grateful and privileged to be here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm grateful to you for being here and spending this time with me to chat about this important topic around leading with genuine care. You are doing that through your work there, and really helping the whole country, look at education and how we can be better with it, and these principles and the leadership in all these school districts, and helping them lead with genuine care, so they can make a huge difference in our kids' lives. So thank you for that, Anne. So appreciative.
Thank you, Rob.
And to all the loyal listeners of the pod, I greatly appreciate you spending time with us today, and I wish you all much love and gratitude.